Welcome back to Simplifying the State. I'm Adam Watson.
I'm Nicholas Parent.
On today's episode, Harris goes into the Democratic presidential candidate equivalent of the Lion's Den and goes on a Fox News interview. Early voting begins in Georgia and North Carolina, and a breakdown of where the polls now stand in the presidential race some 18 days out from the election. That's right, the bedwetting has begun, people. Okay, so first we're going to start with Harris's recent interview on Fox News. So the interview was done with Brett Baier. It was largely to appeal to women by the looks of it and the topics that were discussed, particularly probably suburban college-educated white women, which is a group that the Democrats either lose by very small margins or sometimes win by small margins, so they're considered a key demographic of people that both sides try to win. She defined her position on immigration and border security a little more, and opened up a little more distance with President Biden. So, Nicholas, what do you think the political ramifications of that interview could be?
I think that a lot of currently Republican women might feel a little bit of a more sympathy or even empathy to Harris during and after that interview, because in the interview, Harris was being interrupted by the interviewer quite a bit, and I'm sure that a good bit of those women have maybe some connection to that, or can at least feel for Harris in that, and so might feel a little bit more connection to Harris personally, and that might show up in the elections and maybe the polls as well.
Right, yeah. I think talking about the polls, I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I don't know if there's much ground to gain for either candidate in the polls. But yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Yeah, I think this is definitely going to be a close election, and I think that this is her trying to reach out to the more uh, independent leading, center leaning Republicans, Nikki Haley Republicans, to try to get them to, come out and support her, because I think it was like 30,000 Republicans in Wisconsin or something like that voted for Nikki Haley in the Republican primary. And if she can get like a third of that to come out and support her, then that's going to be that will probably decide the election if it's super close in Wisconsin. So she made an effort to try to uh, distance herself from Biden a little bit. She said, quote, "My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency," unquote. So Nicholas, if you were, it's time to give the Harris campaign some unsolicited advice here, but if if you were on the Harris campaign team, would you try to create a little distance with Biden on the issues of like the border and inflation, or would you kind of stick hand in hand?
Well, yeah, it depends for the topic. Like for the border, Harris has argued that Trump has been the shutting the door person, while the Democrats and other Republicans have been pretty bipartisan in trying to get um, legislature through to enforce stricter regulations on the border. For other instances, like inflation, for example, Harris might want to distance herself a little for the reason that a lot of people will blame Biden for the amount of inflation that was endured during his presidency, and also he's a fairly unpopular president by approval disapproval ratings. So distancing herself would be a pretty good idea, just not too much.
Right, right. Yeah, you kind of break the economy down into two things. One, it's how people feel, and two, it's how the economy is actually doing. And I think, I've heard people talking about this a lot. You can't tell people that what they're feeling is not real when it comes to the economy. Like, you can't tell them the economy's doing good, which when it comes to like measurable things, it is. I mean, if I were her, I'd talk about, the economy is doing well. We've got a low unemployment rate. We've got high job creation. We're bringing stuff back. But prices are still too high. I mean, and that's what I'd do, and I'd go out and bang that drum, because that's really the main thing that people care about, is how expensive things like groceries are, and going out there and banging the drum and talking about the things that she would maybe do to lower them is, I think, probably her best economic issue. Is she kind of tries to fight Trump to a tie on who Americans trust more on the economy. Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk about early voting in several states. That's right, early voting is here. It's like Black Friday, but instead of a flat screen TV, you're hoping to score a functioning democracy. So I think it was, according to a source in the Georgia Attorney General's office, no, it might have been Secretary of State. Yeah, it was Secretary of State. Uh, 328,000 ballots were cast on Tuesday, early voting in Georgia. So, Nicholas, do you think that could have an impact on who will win that state? Because, I mean, typically when you have early voting, absentee voting, voting by mail, typically those numbers tend to favor Democrats and lean towards Democrats. And I mean, with Joe Biden winning the state by very small margins in 2020, do you think that this possible indication of high voter turnout could, uh, shift the state more to Harris or more to Trump?
Well, the early voting won't cause any changes to people's minds. It'll just give us insight
Right,
into what the people of that state are thinking. So if you're
right,
going off of that, then yes, it does give us some insight. However, it's important to note that more Democrats will be voting, and more Democrats have voted early and nationwide than Republicans, and so cause a that'll be disproportionate to how voting will actually be later on by November.
right. 'Cause, I mean, definitely voter turnout is something that both campaigns have been trying to get, uh, and something that many people are always try to get, a high voter turnout. Uh, so I mean, yeah, it's gonna be slightly better looking for Democrats when it comes to early voting. Is, again, those people tend to favor Democrats, and it may give us some indications as to how many people will come out to vote, but I don't think it will give us a high degree of indication of which way the state will lean. Okay, so we are about 18 days out from the presidential election. I know, terrifying. So we're going to look at where the polls now stand when it comes to that race. So, according to 270towin.com, based on a bunch of different polls, the averages are, pretty much tied. Nationally, Harris is ahead by 2.2%. In the Sun Belt states, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, Trump holds a small lead between 0.5 and 1.2%, uh, which is very small and compared to the blue wall states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Harris has a very small lead, if not tied. I mean, it's indicative of what we are have always kind of known to be true about this race, that even back when Joe Biden was the candidate, is that it was going to be very, very close, and that not much was going to move the needle this close to the election. I think, in terms of seeing candidates gain ground, I think, given that it's already October 17th, I don't think you're going to see much area for growth in these polls. But I mean, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, like you've said, this close to the election, people's minds don't tend to change that easily. And it won't completely solidify the polling, but the polls will not change a whole lot between now and Election Day, so this might be a lot of what we see on Election Day, and yeah.
Right. Because, I mean, most people who haven't made up their minds yet are going to be part of that group that we talked about, which is the people who make up their minds the week or something like that before the election based on what, like, the top headline is. And so you're probably not going to see any major change in these polls from now until Election Day. So, I mean, probably not a great idea to refresh the 538 average from now until Election Day. I mean, polls are basically political horoscopes. They might say one thing, but you're just going to ignore it and hope for the best. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Simplifying the State. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Tune in then.